So Culture Amp is a pretty cool company. I've used it at Intercom when I was there. We use it at Gravitational. Um, you guys raised an 82 mil Series E round by Sequoia last time, right? That was the
Mhm.
last round that you announced publicly.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, and you joined the company how long ago? It's been what, four
Almost
years,
four,
3 years?
almost 4 years. And yeah, I think it's probably about 8 or 9 million when in revenue when I joined. So still early, but it had the product market fit. They'd sold some key marquee customers and we're starting to grow pretty rapidly.
And you said some interesting things about Culture Amp when we spoke last time. So, for example, you mentioned that the sales reps didn't have quotas there, or they did something like that. They didn't have accelerators or something. Tell me more about that, because as a salesperson, that was really interesting.
We definitely have quotas. People know how they're doing, and we believe in metrics deeply. I think we're probably one of the larger companies that doesn't have a commission plan. Currently, all of our reps are on fixed incentive comp. We look at that all the time and take a look. And there's pros and cons to it, but definitely from a philosophical perspective, there's internal motivations where you want to do a great job, you're driven, you do all those things, and then there's external motivations, money. If you put money on it, it changes incentives, and so we've been able to grow fairly large without incentive compensation. I think it works very well at SMB and mid, and at enterprise, we talk about it.
So, when you first started at the company, you said it was in the single digit millions of ARR, and just doing some back of the napkin math, I would assume you're much higher than that now with the last round that you've raised, right? I mean, I would assume you're in the high double digits, maybe even the triple digits. But when you joined as one of the early hires, were you focused mostly on operations or marketing? What was your start into Culture Amp?
100% focus on operations. Like I at Box was running marketing operations and post sale operations, so call it customer success operations, and had worked really closely with the sales ops. I think when I talked to the chief growth officer JD, they said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to run sales ops," and I said, "That's not of interest to me." And they said, "Well, what is?" And I said, I see the value of looking across the entire funnel and then also looking at both the systems and the data. So I've since the beginning have run all of ops, all of customer systems, so the systems that touch the revenue and touch the customer experience other than the product, and then also the data and insights that are derived from all of those different systems, and then finally the strategy. So I've done that since the beginning. When I started for a month or two, I'd rolled up my sleeves and did it myself, and then we built out a team, and I've hired some great people on the team.
So when you're joining a company that early, what are some of the first things that you think about as an operations expert? So you join Culture Amp in the single digit millions of ARR. You come in, they want you to be sales ops. You said you don't have an interest in that. You want to do something bigger. What do you start tackling in those first 90 days?
I mean, I think you're just getting the basic systems and data in place. And I remember before I joined, I got in a conference room with some of the CS and the salespeople, and we just, they were nice enough to put me in a room with a bunch of people and just let me ask a lot of questions. And about 10 minutes into it, I knew that I could help, right? Because I asked, how do you track your customers? Where do you see the risks? How do you deal with all these things? And they said, well, here's the Google sheet we're working on, right? So even though they had Salesforce, they weren't utilizing it well. So for me, step one was ripping apart the systems and ripping out all the complexity that may have been there from people that don't think in terms of how do you scale it. We were lucky enough to have a really smart consultant that has been with us since the beginning, and more than happy to talk about how we leverage that could do amazing things in Salesforce. And just getting the basic core system. So there was 2 or 3 calls that I kind of made of things I knew we needed in place as foundational. And so we did those. And then it really starts to be about winning the hearts and the minds of the teams, right? You have to spend, when 60% of your pipeline that's open pipeline has close dates in the past, you've probably got a pipeline issue, right? So you roll up your sleeves, talk to all the sales managers, have to convince them of the value of these things, and working with them to be able to change the culture. I probably spent less time on the install base side. I did. There were some quick wins on the install base side, But beyond that, I think I focus more on the marketing and the sales ops to start. And then, the install base kind of comes in chunks.
So you said when you came in, there was two or three things that you had in mind that you wanted to get to right away. What were those things?
I mean, one of the first calls I made was attribution data. So we called Visible. They tried to sell us at Box for a long time, but we had a single touch attribution model at Box, which meant that it was all about the last touch. And so, when you're trying to evaluate marketing programs and behaviors there, it's hard. The beautiful thing about attribution data is the sales team can also use it too, which is like when they're looking at an opportunity, now they can start to see how did that come in, what kind of content are they engaging in, how are they utilizing us. And so we started to be able to do some rudimentary scoring of opportunities just based upon that alone. And so that's one of those foundational data items that you want in early, and then you build your programs around. So that was one. I'd say the other one is mapping in product data. So it's hard to really run CS and customer marketing if you don't have the data from the product. So I did those things pretty quickly as well too.
And you said when you came in, you had to sell the sales managers on data hygiene, keeping Salesforce clean. What are some of the ways you're positioning that? Like when you come in as an ops person, you're talking to the VP of sales or the sales managers, what is your go-to pitch of, hey guys, we need to build a strong foundation?
I think you got to listen to them, right? Like, how did they run the team today? The dream scenario is that you're able to bring the dashboards to them to help them manage better. And then as part of that process, they start to manage against the data, right? Like that's the only way the data quality is going to get good. So first and foremost, rather than saying, here's what I need, I showed up and said, what do you need? And there's the what do you need? And then if you don't know the answer to that question, the next thing you do is, well, okay, here is a V1 dashboard. Let's have you respond to it. And here's how it gives you more information and more data. So I think you've got to do the work to enable people to come towards you.
I love that. Giving the sales leadership, marketing leadership, the insights that they need. But I was reading one of your posts and you actually mentioned that you tell your team not to just answer the questions that are asked, but
Yep.
help those leaders frame the question. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you think about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with a specific example. I mean, it's really easy if somebody says, what's my pipeline right now? And you can be like, hey, great, here's the answer, and you move on. But I think if you start to say like, okay, why did they ask that question? How are they utilizing that data? How do I refine the dashboard so the next time I can teach them how to do it themselves so that they feel empowered to do it, right? I don't feel like our team needs or should be the gatekeeper for data. I think a large portion of our team's job is to amplify the leaders so that they know how to use that data in the future. And so I think that's the classic example of it's really, you hear the one of teach a person to fish, they eat give a person a fish, they eat for a day, teach a person to fish, they eat for a lifetime, right? So our job is wherever we can to try to understand the question behind the question, and then like empower them to do that in the future. And like that's also why like I try to get our team out of running the business all the time, but focusing on changing the business, right? So if you're able to give them the answer and make it scalable, it actually ends up that you don't have to build out a huge team. You don't have to spend all your time answering the same question over and over again.
So since I'm leading a sales team at a startup, one of the things that I've been focused on a lot recently is capacity planning for
Yeah.
next year and territory planning. How do you see the role of ops in that? I mean, I have one sales ops person. He's great. He's been helping me a lot. But what would an elite ops team do in that process when it comes to the capacity planning, setting quotas, territory planning? Like, where do you start from? What are the data points that you're looking at, and how are you helping the leadership team make the right calls?
Yeah, I mean, in the essence, it's like the ops. I mean, at the simplest level, the ops team's running the sheet rather than the leader running the sheet, right? Like the ops team is, and so like you've got to get to the point when your leader's comfortable passing, call it the sheet or the or the BI dashboard or whatever it is off to ops to run, right? Like, so that's the first part. And I'm guessing that you probably, like, you look at your ops person, like, I'm guessing you still like can't let go of the spreadsheet, right? You're doing it, and then he may pull a number here or there for you, but like you still own it. And so at a fundamental level, like, I think ops should run the cadence, should own the data and be bringing questions proactively to the leader versus waiting for the leader to ask questions. Like, that's like at the highest level in terms of like a specific piece of it, whether it's territory planning or whatever. Like, ideally you're guiding that through.
And as I was going through your posts, one of the other interesting tidbits that popped out at me was measuring the performance of the ops team.
Yeah.
What how do you really do that, right? Because I've thought about it different ways. My personal opinion is that, for example, if you're in sales ops, you should have variable comp associated with your overall package. If the team like blows out their number as a team, the ops team should get some of that benefit. How do you think about measuring the performance of the ops team, and what are your thoughts in terms of like, should they be incentivized for the
I
team
don't
to
know.
overperform? Like, how do you think about that?
I you can argue either way. I mean, given where we are with incentive comp, like, as a company, I haven't stressed that. I think our ops team is all base pay. Our ops team, lives and breathes the numbers as well too, and sweats it if we're missing, and doesn't if and if we're hitting, like, it feels better. So like, I think people are thinking that. Um, Personally, I think you want to be able to tie rewards to like effort, and I think it's too far removed. So I tend to believe it's more like where I'm focusing, and less about measuring the effectiveness of the team. It's more around, in fact, measuring effectiveness of each individual. And so it's like, how do they think? I've got a whole post on like, how do people tick? How do people think? What are the key skill sets to have, right? And my job is to always, if I'm not seeing people frame the questions in the right way or pull things forward, or the communication or project execution or those things, like, we give people coaching on that. So I think in the end, like, if you have a strong ops leader, you can get the same out whether you incentivize people or not. Like, sounds good, but like, how does an action that an ops person takes on a deal desk or a territory plan like directly impact that? And so I think if I were to do it, I'd probably do it. If we had bonuses, it'd probably be more of a subjective bonus based upon performance. Um, yeah.
And then what about just general measurement? So like when you're looking at your ops team and you're identifying high performers, or you just want to look at the ops team and see how they're doing. What are the key metrics you're looking at, and judging them against?
High performer is not based upon metrics, right? It's based upon it's based upon the skill sets, right? Like, there is not a set of metrics like how many tickets did you close, or how many, feedback is obviously is a good metric, but
And what about the skill sets then?
yeah, I got a whole article on it. Like, what are the top skills of an ops person? It's a lot of the soft stuff, but like, when I'm hiring for ops, I'm oftentimes hiring for how somebody thinks over what specifically they've done. Now, there will be specific ones, right? Like, if you're hiring for sales strategy and you haven't done territory planning and commissions, like, that's hard. But like, I've had tremendous success. I took a gentleman that was on the SOPs team at Box and turned him into marketing analytics, and now he's running marketing analytics at Atlassian, right? And I took another gentleman that was leading a SOPs in Europe, and now he's my marketing ops guy, and he's absolutely amazing. And so, like, I think I hire for how do people think, and I believe that the skill, like, if you're smart and you can move fast, you can learn the systems and the tools pretty quickly.
Outside of
And then, frankly,
sales,
I'd also say, like, it's super valuable to have my MOPS person understand how SDR ticks, right? Or to have my marketing analytics person have lived like sales territory planning, so that the cross pollination is incredibly valuable.
in terms of the relationship, so you talked about the relationship between sales ops, the sales team, marketing. But when you think of overall the ops team in general, tell me a little bit more about how you guys collaborate with finance. I mean, in the early days, I think a lot of startups don't even have a finance department, right? It might just be like one dude approving discounts. But as you get bigger and you're thinking about things like forecasting, capacity planning, what does the collaboration look like between finance and sales ops?
Yeah, forecasting, capacity planning are really on our side, at least within Culture Amp, right? Like those are like go-to-market ops, like type things. If they get into headcount, they could touch a little bit on finance. I'd say just where our finance is structured, we don't, but we have a deep partnership with finance. So, you know, ARR, if we ever go to commissions, all those types of things. I think there's this really nice interplay of ops is the quality of the data that's coming out of the systems. And then finance is, and so ops is getting it to like that 98%, right? Like it is absolutely right. You can put your stuff on top, and then finance is calculating the metrics that are like going to the board or going to different places. So I think we have a number of different handoffs between our team and finance. So on revenue quality, we're auditing, making sure that data is clean before it goes into the billing systems. But and then finance takes it over, make sure they're on ARR and quality of the ARR. We're also doing that. So I think there's a number of different overlaps. I've lived in a box where FP&A was much more deeply involved in some of the models, but not really involved in like territories or capacity planning, more involved in like rev rec and deal quality and things like that.
Okay, let's take it back to again the early days of Culture Amp. So you come on board, you have a couple ideas that you're pushing and trying to get people on board for. When you think about the ops stack in general, where was the logical starting point? And maybe walk us through how it's evolved into a couple stages up till now.
I mean, in GTM Ops, you start with Salesforce. It's like there's a core set of tools. We didn't have them all in place, but you've got Salesforce outreach for the SDR team. On the marketing side, you've got your marketing automation platform, or HubSpot, and then you build around that, right? And I think generally what you're trying to do is in the marketing automation world, we're ripping functionality out of like the marketing automation, and we're going for best of breed. So we've ripped out scoring, we've ripped out content, we've ripped out web tracking, we've ripped out lead routing, we've ripped out all those types of things. So it's like on the marketing side, you're definitely like, where is the HubSpot or Marketo of the world not going to scale, and like where do we need to rip those things out, right? So I think for us on the marketing side, HubSpot is a nice platform, but it's primarily form fill and email, and so we've been able to get better performance out of all that. On the sales side, like Stack's not that complicated, right? Like it's Salesforce, SteelBrick for CPQ. You could go with something else, but it's been fine. We did CPQ a lot earlier than most people do, because I know that it's a lot harder to fit your pricing models into a CPQ after the fact than it is to do it earlier. So
For the people who don't know what CPQ is, would you mind just expanding on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the term stands for configure price quote. It's effectively like your quoting, your pricing approval thing. So SteelBrick or like an Aptus would be kind of the two most common. Generally, I see companies in like the $50 million range put these things in. We put it in at about 22, 25 million. It was one of those things that I'd seen at Box. We were struggling to retrofit on at the end, and so it's hard when you're at that scale. And so we were able to put in CPQ early, which allows us like a lot tighter controls on what types of pricings we offer, what discounts, the visibility, and all of that as well too. So you put that into place. So sales, the sales side's pretty straightforward. There's a couple additional things that you can put on to make the team more effective. I'd say the CS side, I'm happy to riff on that, but at a fundamental level, like we built most of that in-house. And then the data side, I think, is the last piece for us of really making sure that you can leverage the data and do insights, and then answer questions that maybe go beyond what Salesforce can do, right? Like there's some fundamental just restrictions of Salesforce in terms of the insights and the analytics you can do.
I still remember how hard I tried to sell you on Intercom live chat for all those months. And then did you end up going with Drift with that, by the way? I still don't remember.
We still have not gone fully in chat. We look at it every quarter. We're testing and piloting some different tools. I believe in the power of chat. At the same time, I think it has to integrate deeply into your sale. if chat doesn't understand marketing and lead scoring and lead routing and the importance of every conversation, it doesn't happen. So Drift is definitely a likely candidate along with one or two others that we take a look at.
When you think about the stack, right? So you just walked us through the stack at Culture Amp, and it seems like you had some of these things baked in earlier than most companies do, like CPQ. Um, but what are some of the things, if you could go back right now and maybe implement sooner, you would do?
I think I think the data side and the foundation took us too long. And so we were longer to BI insights and stuff. And that was just, fighting through maybe a legacy set of data infrastructure that made it hard. I think we've gotten to a really good place inspired by two of our teammates that have just like understood where data is going. And so I think I see most companies, like companies 10 times our size, you talk to a sales strategist and you say, well, how do you do this data? And they're like, well, I'm really good at exporting it and manipulating Excel. And like, that's not going to get you there. So I think, we spent an extra year on the data infrastructure than we needed to. We're in a good place now. Beyond that, I think every decision we've been empowered to make within, for us, it's more around reviewing with customer leadership the pros and the cons of different systems, right? So like, do we do chat versus do we do this, and how do we do it? So I think we've made decisions at the right time for the business and been empowered to do that in a really good way. There's not much I'd go back and do differently other than like I probably would have pushed the red like emergency button on data a year earlier. But I think we thought we could fight through and we didn't get there. So it took us some time. We had to escalate that to exec to kind of get that one done.
And what sorts of BI tools are you using internally? Just out
Yeah,
of curiosity.
I truly think we are best of breed now. And two of my team have just really catalyzed this and I've learned a lot from them. We've simplified the stack dramatically. We're not around like point solutions for BI. So we have Fivetran for intake of data, right? And so that allows us to map new systems in really quickly to the data warehouse. We use DBT for data modeling. And now we're in the process of shifting to Looker for the BI layer. And that's been nice because we became agnostic on the BI layer. That enables us to do amazing things. And then the final piece that we're working to fix is we're exploring census that could allow us to write data back from the data warehouse to customer systems, which can be amazing, right? Like imagine if you can build a forecasting model in a BI system and then push that back into Salesforce, or you can build a better health score and push that back in. So there's a lot to do. I mean, I think I talk with a lot of people. I think this type of agnostic view where we own it versus being very reliant upon vendors that have a specific solution for sales or a specific solution for marketing is long-term much more scalable.
So you mentioned Census, Looker, Fivetran. Just for the people listening to this who aren't as into the weeds on the data stuff, like what sorts of questions are you answering using those tools for the sales team?
Yeah. So at a fundamental level, and here I'll just pull it up, see if I can find it. But there are three types of questions that Salesforce just is limited on, right? So the first one is cross-object comparisons, right? So take for example converting a lead through to one revenue. Very hard. You basically can't do that in Salesforce without exporting it, manipulating, and doing it, and that means you never really have a full funnel view. So BI allows us, and all of the associated tools allows us to do that. The second one that you just can't do in Salesforce is kind of like historical snapshots. So if you wanted to know what was your entering pipeline a quarter ago, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Pipeline coverage is one of the most valuable metrics out there. It provides a tremendous linkage between sales and marketing. So we're able to look at, what was the pipeline, what was the historical pipeline on any given day, and then how did that pipeline convert through? So super powerful there. And then, those are two big examples, and there's others, but there are just because of Salesforce being a point in time system. If you're not building out and snapshotting that data and then they're able to leverage it in a certain way, you're just going to be limited. And I've talked to companies that are, billion-dollar companies that can't do what we're doing today.
In one of your posts, you talk about how the role of the ops team isn't to make sure like one team is looking great, but instead your focus is just driving revenue, making the hard calls. The hard calls part was kind of interesting to me. Can you walk us through some of the hard calls that ops people have to make or you've had to deal with while you're a culture amp?
Maybe not hard calls, but just, I think it's knowing where in the funnel you really have the problem, right? Like if you have marketing and sales and they're on either side, they can, you can see a lot of like pushing and pulling on that, right? In prior companies, I saw multiple different lead scoring systems and multiple different people that were looking at different ways to measure their success. I think we're the glue that brings these things together, right? So everyone always asks like, hey, you have a problem with marketing and sales and how they overlap? And I was like, no, we don't have that problem, right? Like, because we're looking at one set of numbers with the two teams and we're all collaborating on these things. So it's not like it's hard calls. I think, what we're also able to do is say like, this lever, like we're going through 2021 planning right now, and I know the 2 to 3 levers that if we don't fix, will significantly like retard our growth. And so then we're able to surface those things up and try to catalyze conversations around those things.
As an early stage company, one of the problems that I run into is, you talk to investors or maybe your CEO, talks to another CEO and they start talking about different metrics, but different companies have different definitions for things. Like, so for example, qualified pipeline. So, as we're doing 2021 planning, people will say, well, on average, the best of breed companies can close 30% of their qualified pipeline within the quarter. What are some of the things you're looking for to make sure that, first of all, do you even use benchmark data at this stage at Culture Amp? Like, are you looking at other companies, similar size, similar industry, and seeing how you stack up to those companies?
Yeah, let me maybe take a step back. Like, so Box, I ran CS ops, right? And then when I took over marketing ops, I think things became a little bit clearer and starker, right? So marketing data, like CS data is different for every single company based upon how you're structured, how your install base is, what your motions are, how your product works. And so it's hard to benchmark. Marketing data is really, really easy to benchmark, and sales data is as well too, right? Like there are companies out there like a Topo that you can go out and get those data points. So I think just myself, like chief sales officer, our marketing team, like we know what those benchmarks are, right? Around like what's an MQL conversion rate, and then we start to break those into their component pieces. I don't spend a lot of time looking at benchmarks. You either know if they're good or not. A 50% win rate off of pipeline feels good. A 5% win rate off of pipeline doesn't feel very good. And so then what it's all about is tracking it over a time series and looking at where those things are and how you move those things in the right direction. And in certain metrics, we will benchmark against other people, and we want to make sure we're looking at things like we'll benchmark retention or cost per opportunity or key metrics that drive efficiency as well too. So I generally find like the higher level numbers are easier to benchmark, like a magic number or things like that. They're just like universal. And then when you get into stuff that's maybe more nuanced, it's a little harder.
So if you're advising a startup right now, and I know you do advise a couple startups, and they're looking for their first ops hire, how do you determine what they should be looking for in that first hire? Like, are you looking for a more senior person? Are you looking for someone with a very specific skill set? Or do you ask some questions from that startup, understand what their goals are before recommending it? I want to see how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends upon like, there's never one size fits all advice, right? Like if you're growing fast, I think at the highest level, if you're growing fast, overhire. You want somebody that can grow in to run that team and can see the problems before you hit them. And I think that's what Culture Amp did with me. And I felt very empowered to not just think about like, what are we solving tomorrow, but out there in the future, right? And so, but at the same time, I see a lot of, and so if you're growing like 5 or 10%, like hire out what you need or grow somebody into it and have some, get some external mentorship. I think you can go that's kind of the continuum. And then within that, you kind of think it through. But I'm a general fan of like having a strong ops function and a leader that can really like be a partner rather than be an order taker. But I've seen it done all different ways. So it's, it really depends.
So for that first hire, on average, are you looking for someone who's like an expert in Salesforce?
No, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't think you need an expert in Salesforce that can do like Apex code and write that. Like I've actually found really good success. Our a firm that we use called Black Tab Solutions, just to, shout out to them. Like they've been an extension of our team, right? Like I can write some stuff, or I could in past lives, but now like what our team does is understands the business requirements and then works with them to get it built. So I'm actually a big fan of having an extension of your team that is experts at writing Salesforce code. I think I separated into configure versus customize, right? Like if your first hire can't configure Salesforce, you got a problem. If your first hire can't customize Salesforce, that's a solvable problem externally.
I love that. And that was Black Tab.
Yeah, Black Tab. It's a gentleman named Nolan and his team. It's a small team, but Black Tab used to be the secret tab at Salesforce where all the people that were in the know in Salesforce, there was a special Black Tab. And so I think they named their firm after it. It's small, but they've got some real marquee clients. They're, a great extension of our team.
Okay.
But don't everyone go use them, because then,
yeah, I was going to say, yeah, be careful. You're giving all your secrets away. In terms of just things that you're reading right now or interesting trends that you're seeing in the ops space, like what are you excited about?
Data, like stop the silos, starting to think of like, how do you build like machine learning models on top of this go-to-market data, which you can then start to push, right? Like how many companies have a world-class forecast model? Or versus like they've thrown together 4 things in Salesforce with a formula in Salesforce and done it, right? I think that stuff should be easy. How many companies can, build a high quality like churn identification model or a lead scoring model? And so I think that there's some really cool stuff that you start to be able to put on top of data. In terms of like companies that are out there, like, I track them all, and there's always cool ones. Some of them I advise on my side. I guess I say I think more about the problems that I can't solve. Right. So it's like there are some just inherent problems that exist with every go-to-market function. A great example is Salesforce and marketing automation are terrible about marketing to people. They market to emails and leads or contacts, but I want to follow somebody through their entire journey. And so if you sign up for a form on your personal email, and then then I start to market to you on your work email, and then you leave your work, I want to follow you through that entire journey. None of the systems are very good at that. Customer marketing doesn't scale very well, right? So like I spend a lot of time thinking about like, what are those problems that like I'm searching for solutions for, and hopefully vendors can help us solve some of those things.
When you say when you leave work, follow that person, are you saying like follow them on their like social network channels or like personal email?
At its simplest form, if you send an email to somebody's work email and it fails, you roll right to the backup, right? Like that, which is like if you've interacted and I'm able to identify you, and I know, I mean, today you can pretty much identify multiple emails. Like systems are not good at rolling right to that backup, right? Like that shouldn't have to be somebody going in and researching and finding out where they went. That's pretty straightforward and easy. But then like Salesforce is dependent upon that email, but like there should be either a person's object or a program that just is like, great, so this email's dead, let's go find the next one. And then you run into, obviously GDPR and approvals to market to those people.
The one thing that I wanted to challenge you on or push back on is when it comes to forecasting, right? So you're talking about how many companies have a world-class forecasting process. And I agree, like none that I've been at. But I think one of the problems with forecasting is, and I know this term gets thrown around a lot, it's gut feel, right? When it comes to your deals. So how do you like bake that into any sort of machine learning or AI type thing, or do you just try to get as close as possible with some sort of an algorithm, and then ultimately have a person gut check that and make sure that it's not
Yeah. Yeah.
wildly off?
Yeah. I mean, every forecasting approach, and I'll use the example of like churn since I built that pretty deeply. You have an objective and a subjective approach, right? So the objective approach is the best model you can do. The subjective approach is what your team thinks. So like, and I've got a good article on LinkedIn on this one, but we have a health score, which is, decently predictive. And we've been able to prove that like on average, a higher health score equals a lower likelihood to churn and a higher likelihood to expand. And then we have what we call account mood, right? So red, green, orange, and we threw in blue for the heck of it. And so, if you have a low, what I want to do is I want those two opposing forces to spark conversations that will yield better results. So if you have a high health score and a red mood, I want your manager and you to be discussing why. If you have a green mood and a low health score, I would also like you to be discussing why and documenting that and learning, right? So the two should work together versus we just have a objective score.
I like that a lot.
And I think you can apply that to leads, like every type of scoring, right? Like marketing, sales, CS, support.
Yeah, instead of relying on the expected revenue thing that Salesforce spits out based on the stage.
Oh yeah, that's chronically wrong at the beginning of a quarter, and of course highly predictive at the end because it is.
If there's one book or kind of resource you would recommend for people who are new to ops, maybe at a startup that's in the single digits of millions in ARR and they're just trying to wrap their heads around it. I mean, I know you've written a lot about this stuff, but like, what do you recommend people get into just to get acquainted?
You preempted my thing. I wrote a six volume handbook on LinkedIn for GTM Ops of just trying to link to all the best resources that I've done and things like that. I think by the time you read a book on some of this stuff, it's outdated. I'd say on the marketing side, there's one Traction by the founders of DuckDuckGo that's phenomenal that I always go back to and I gift to a lot of people. That's more on like the marketing and the different channel identification and prioritization. In terms of sales, there's so many books out there. So yeah.
What is your favorite couple of sales books? I mean, there is a lot out there, but I feel like there's also a lot of fluff.
I don't read as many anymore. I learned from my colleagues, right? Like we've got groups of folks that we get together on regular bases to talk about this stuff. We do a ton of mind share. Like my team absolutely loves it. So we try to bring in as frequently as we can somebody outside of our company that's done this before, right? So we brought in like a guy that was doing like sales analytics at Twilio, or we brought in like the head of marketing ops at Splunk and his whole team. And so we love to like mind share, and I learn more there than any book I would read.
Are you guys still doing that just via Zoom?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's still happening. It was always fun in San Francisco. We normally take Friday afternoons and truck over to somebody's office or have them come to us. But now we do it more via Zoom.
Good stuff, man. Well, this has been a really, really good conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time and walking us through some of the things that you're working on at CultureAmp. I really like the bit about forecasting too, and using the subjective and the objective approach. So thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we'll get to chat soon.
I love it. You got a great style. Thanks so much, buddy.
Talk to you soon, man.
Cool. Cheers.